Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Lowlands region. This PowerPoint has been created for grade 5 social studies students. It is a direct reading from the book Voices of Canada, People, Places and Possibilities, written by Donna M. Goodman, J. Craig Harding and Thomas A. Smith. I do not own the rights. This presentation has only been created to help students during this pandemic. In 1534, the King of France sent Jacques Cartier to find a sea route to China. On his first voyage across the ocean, Cartier reached the Gaspé Peninsula. He found well-developed communities where the Haudenosaunee were living. However, many years would pass before the settlers would come from France to begin a colony. In 1608, Samuel de Champlain founded the settlement of Quebec. French settlers were soon clearing the land and building homes. Champlain also made trade agreements with the First Nations. He sent French explorers to live among the Oanda and learn their language. Although life was hard for the settlers, the colony gradually began to grow. Champlain was named governor of the colony of New France. 100 years later, New France included parts of what are now Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, and the United States. In 1617, Louis Hibbert sold his house and garden in Paris, France. He and his wife, Marie Rolette, took their 3 children on the greatest adventure of their lives. They were moving to New France to farm a piece of land beside the St. Lawrence River, which Champlain had promised them. Louis's goal was to build a farm that could support the family. In their new country, Louis and Marie cleared land to grow grain and vegetables. They were the first wheat farmers in Canada. They also cleared land to raise chickens and pigs. They planted an orchard with apples that they brought from France. Louis also made and sold medicine. After a lot of hard work, the Hibbert family became successful settlers in New France. As more settlers arrived, life was centered on farming and trade. The land in New France was owned and controlled by wealthy men called seigneurs. Abitants paid the seigneurs with part of their harvest in exchange for being allowed to live on and farm the seigneur's land. Some definitions: seigneurs were landowners in New France who rented out pieces of land to the habitants. Habitants were French settlers in New France who cleared and farmed the land. Under the seigneurial system, the land was divided into long, narrow strips. The seigneurial system had been in place in New France since the first French settlers arrived. It was understood and accepted. The king granted large pieces of land to wealthy, important citizens. The seigneurs kept the biggest lots for themselves and parceled out the rest to the habitant families. Les filles du roi means daughters of the king. This was the name given to hundreds of young women from France. Encouraged by the French king, they sailed to New France during the mid-1600s to marry male settlers and build families to work on the farms. Many people now living in Quebec have ancestors who were the filles du roi. For many Francophone settlers, practicing the Catholic religion was important. Champlain invited priests from France. They provided religious services for the settlers and later ran schools for the children. The priests also wanted to teach the First Nations people about the Catholic faith. They traveled throughout New France to achieve this goal. Many were Jesuits. The Jesuits often noted their observations in letters and diaries. This vast collection became known as the Jesuit Relations. What they thought at the time can be learned from their observations. As more priests and nuns came from France, they began to build their own settlements called missions. Montreal began as Ville Marie, a mission that had the first hospital in New France. It was in these missions that settlers and First Nations could seek help in times of need. Food, clothing, and medical help were provided by the priests and nuns year-round. For many years, France and Britain fought for control over North America. Both countries had established colonies, which were sources of great wealth because of the fur trade and other resources. In 1759, the British attacked Quebec, and by the next year, the British had taken control of New France. Later, they renamed the land along the St. Lawrence River the province of Quebec. They also created British laws that took rights away from the Canadiens. At this time, there were over 70,000 Canadiens living in the province of Quebec. Many feared the changes brought by the new British government. Merchants such as François Béby brought petitions to the British in London to protest the loss of Canadian rights. At the same time, British settlers living in the 13 colonies were preparing to rebel against the British. Britain feared that the Canadiens would join in the rebellion. To help guarantee the loyalty of the Canadiens, the Quebec Act was passed in 1774. It said that the Canadiens would be able to keep their land and the seigneurial system. They would be able to practice their religion freely, speak their language, and keep their civil laws. As a result of the Quebec Act, the majority of the Canadiens remained neutral during the American Revolution. The rights in the Act guaranteed that they would be able to maintain their language and identity. The Quebec Act was the first step towards bilingualism in Canada. After the American Revolution began in 1776, thousands of United Empire Loyalists moved north. They were loyal to the British King. Many of them spoke English and wanted to live under British rule. Most of the Loyalists went to communities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Others came to Great Lakes St. Lawrence Lowlands. However, the Loyalists were uncomfortable with the ways of life that had been guaranteed in the province of Quebec by the Quebec Act. They didn't like the seigneurial system. They wanted to own land themselves. They wanted the official language to be English. They wanted to practice their own religion, and they wanted to have British laws. The British government wanted to satisfy everyone. So in 1791, it divided the colony into two parts, Upper Canada and Lower Canada. This way, each group could keep its language, its religion, and its way of life. The names of Upper and Lower Canada were chosen because of the position of the areas next to the St. Lawrence River, which flows downstream to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Upper Canada was upstream, and Lower Canada was to the lower end of the river. So the French population lived in Lower Canada, and the English-speaking population lived in Upper Canada. When the Loyalists first came in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Lowlands, they often had difficulty finding good land. The Canadiens were already occupying the best lands in the province of Quebec. Many of the Loyalists settled further west, in present-day southern Ontario. This is a story about the experience of James Dietrich, a United Empire Loyalist child. It's titled Hardships. None of us had any shoes or stockings, winter or summer, as those we brought with us were soon worn out. At length my father tanned some leather, and I recollect the first pair of shoes he made, which fell to my lot. I greased and putting them too near the fire, on returning to my grief, found that my shoes were all shriveled up, so that I could never wear them. It was 12 months before I obtained another pair. Not all Loyalists were British. Many were members of First Nations. Joseph Brant was a Mohawk leader born in Ohio. He was worried that if the Americans won the war in 1776, they would take more Mohawk traditional land in that area. Brant wanted to fight with the British against the Americans, but at first they would not let him. So he sailed to England and told the king, "The Mohawks have on all occasions shown their loyalty to the great king." Brant did fight with the British. In fact, he became an officer in the army. The American colonists won the war and took Mohawk land, as Brant had feared. Brant was able to convince the British government to set aside land for the Mohawk along the Grand River in Ontario. He then led almost 2,000 Mohawks there from New York State. For the next 20 years, Brant worked to protect the land for his people. In 1830, a man named Josiah Henson landed on a beach in Fort Erie, Ontario. He had just crossed the Niagara River at night in a boat. Later, Josiah wrote, "When my feet first touched the Canada shore, I threw myself on the ground, rolled in the sand, seized handfuls of it, and kissed them and danced around." Josiah Henson and thousands of other slaves escaped to freedom using the Underground Railroad, which was not a railway at all. It was the name for the people who worked secretly to help slaves reach Upper Canada safely. Some people helped the runaways move from one safe place to another. Others offered their houses to sleep in and hot meals to eat. For some escaped slaves, the journey could take as long as a year. For many, the destination was the Lowlands. Definition: slaves. Slaves are people who are owned by another person and made to work for little or no money. Parts of the 13 colonies and later part of the United States forced Black people to work as slaves for almost 200 years. The stamp that you see on your screen, this stamp was designed to remember Josiah Henson. He settled in Dresden, Ontario. He helped others escaped slaves learn how to farm. So you have 3 maps on your screen. Starting from the left-hand side, you will see places in Nova Scotia where Black Loyalists settled. Then you have a map of the United States, and it shows the patterns or the paths that many of the slaves took to get to Canada. And the last map shows southern Ontario, places where Black Loyalists also settled. About 8 million immigrants, mostly from Britain, Scotland, and Ireland, came to the British colonies in Canada between 1815 and 1850. This was called the Great Migration. These immigrants faced many hardships aboard ship, and once they arrived, thousands of British and Irish people settled in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence lowlands. For many, this was a chance to start a new life. Many ships with immigrants from Europe were overcrowded, and often there was not enough food and water. Terrible diseases spread among the passengers, many of whom died before they arrived to Canada. To make sure that the diseases did not spread throughout the lowland communities, all ships had to stop at Grosse Isle. Grosse Isle is an island in the St. Lawrence River, not far from Quebec City. There, doctors tried to cure as many people as they could before letting them onto the mainland. Despite their attempts, thousands of people died on Grosse Isle. This is a journal entry from Catherine Parr Traill. Catherine Parr Traill traveled by ship from England and landed at Grosse Isle. She was Susan Moody's sister. This is what she wrote in her journal. August 12, 1832. We reached Grosse Isle. Yesterday evening, there are several vessels lying at anchor close to the shore. One bears the melancholy symbol of disease, the yellow flag. She is a passenger ship and has the smallpox and measles among her crew. The Irish in Quebec. Many children were left orphans after their parents died on Grosse Isle. Patrick and Thomas Quinn were adopted by a Francophone named George Burke. With him, they learned French and adopted a Francophone identity. Today, there are many Francophone families in Quebec with Irish last names. Today, ships can travel on the St. Lawrence River from the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Superior. In the past, people had to portage around rapids, such as the Lachine Rapids near Montreal. The rapids prevented large ships from traveling on the river. Over the years, people built canals and locks. Canals are long, narrow strips dug out of the land and filled with water. They are used to join two bodies of water. Built into the canals are locks. Locks act like staircases or elevators for ships. Using canals and locks, workers connected the St. Lawrence River, the Great Lakes, and other rivers and lakes. This system is called the St. Lawrence Seaway. In order to build the St. Lawrence Seaway, more than 6,500 people had to move to new towns. 10 villages were flooded. They became known as the Lost Villages. After the seaway was built, shipping activity on the St. Lawrence River increased. Factories were built close to the river and the Great Lakes because the seaway allowed for easier shipping of materials and products. These factories caused pollution. What effect would that have on the local wildlife? Beluga whales live in part of the St. Lawrence. Pollution in the river has made them sick and unable to reproduce. Today, environmental groups in the area monitor the condition of the river and campaign to reduce pollution. An important result of the campaign to help the beluga was creation of the Saguenay and St. Lawrence Marine Park, managed by Parks Canada and Parks Quebec. The park protects a section of the St. Lawrence. The park helps to protect the ecosystem where the whales live and also educates the public about the importance of protecting the fragile marine environment.